metal, a transparent metal that we call glass steel. It's got about the same structural strength as concrete. And here's the main dome from the other end. And you see something curious there. You see people flying. Now, the main dome here is filled with air at the same pressure as the air we're breathing right now, so that people can live and work inside the dome in a comfortable environment. But you're on the moon. Everything is only 1/6 the weight it is on Earth. Your own body is only 1/6 the weight it is on Earth. But your muscles are still trained to Earth gravity, which means you can rent a pair of wings and fly. Better than hang gliding. You don't need a breeze. You can flap like a bird and take off. It's a lot of fun. Of course, some employees carry it too far. They buzz the pedestrians and get themselves in trouble. The energy to supply moon base electricity comes from the sun. Now, a day at moon base's latitude on the moon lasts about 350 hours. So there's a long period of time when the sun is shining full blast on the surface. We take the silicon out of the lunar soil, build solar cells which convert sunlight directly to electricity. And we generate twice the amount of electricity we actually are budgeted to use, so that during the lunar night, which is also 350 hours long, we still have electricity even though the sun is not shining. During the daylight hours, we store about half the electricity we generate in large superconducting coils and then tap that energy during the hours of night. So we call them solar energy farms, and they literally work like farms. We have automated machinery that scoops up lunar soil in one end, processes solar cells, and deposits them on the surface of the moon at the other end. So they continuously make additional solar energy farms for us. They enlarge the amount of area we have, give us more electrical generation capability. These machines are automated. They don't need somebody in them to run them. Very often they are teleoperated, which means we have an operator back at the base, safely underground, connected electronically to the machine and just monitoring it and making certain it's working properly. Living quarters are deep underground, and they're as comfortable as modern technology can make them. Even though you're maybe 30 or more feet underground, every apartment has a window. It's a video window. It's a large, flat video screen where you can look at pictures of sent by cameras from the surface of the moon, or you can put in your own videotapes. Lots of people bring tapes of earthly scenes, of forests or rivers or oceans, and use that as sort of their picture window to a familiar and beautiful scene from Earth. Now, at moon base, water is very scarce, and it's rationed. You will get a monthly allotment of water, and it's yours to use any way you like. You can take bubble baths or fill water pistols and squirt your neighbors. But if you use up all the water before the end of the month, that's it. You have got to beg or borrow water from your neighbors, or go to the water rationing board and convince them that you have a good case for getting an extra allotment. And they're pretty tough. You can serve on the water rationing board, though, and that may give you an edge. Working quarters, we make as much use of robotics and automation as we possibly can. It's expensive to bring people from Earth to the moon. There's only about 2,000 people living in moon base, and any job that can be done twice the same way, we want a machine to do. You will see this robot is making coffee and donuts for the worker who is apparently busily having a coffee break. As I said, the moon's resources include oxygen, aluminum, titanium, silicon, iron. The moon lacks metals heavier than iron. It's very tough to find any gold on the moon, for example. It also lacks some of the materials we need for life support, like carbon and nitrogen. They have to be imported either from the Earth or from other parts of the solar system. And of course, we import hydrogen to mix with lunar oxygen and make water. Now, the key to the moon's economic success, to moon base's economic success, is the fact that the moon is small, it's airless. You can launch payloads off the moon at less than a 20th of the cost of launching the same payload from the Earth. In fact, to get off the moon, you don't even need a rocket. You can use a slingshot, an electrical catapult. That's what we see here. It's several miles long. It is not used for people because it accelerates its payloads to, what's the number here? Oh, something like 200 times the force of gravity. So if you rode in one of those cars, you would be smashed flat very quickly. But you can take non-human, non-living payloads off the moon for pennies, where it costs thousands of dollars or millions of dollars on the Earth. And you may notice that on the moon, parents do take children for walks out in the open, and kids still pull little red wagons. Moon base has become a major source of raw materials, natural resources, for the factories that are growing in orbit around the Earth. Now, the first factory put in orbit around the Earth was put up in 1991 by a Texas company called Space Industries Incorporated. And if we can step back to 1988 for just a moment, that is real. Space Industries will put up a factory to do zero-gravity manufacturing in 1991. Now, as factories grow in orbit around the Earth, they run into an economic problem. It costs thousands of dollars to take a pound of raw materials from the Earth up to a factory just 100 miles above the Earth's surface. If you could take the same raw materials from the moon and bring them to that factory, the transportation costs would be a few pennies instead of a few $1,000s. So that is the key to Moonbase's economic strength. More than that, the management of Moonbase decided we didn't want Moonbase to become essentially a third world country, an operation that depends on supplying raw materials to other industries. We began to develop our own industries. We built factories on the surface of the moon in that airless environment. High vacuum is a very, very nice ingredient for many chemical and metallurgical processes. So our factories are open to the vacuum. We have maintenance robots in them, but no people. At least we try to keep people out. The factories use solar energy, both to produce electricity, and also we can focus sunlight with mirrors and produce very, very high temperatures. It's like a Boy Scout setting a piece of paper afire with a magnifying glass. We can create temperatures out of sunlight that are hotter than a blast furnace will give you. So we use the sun as the source of energy for our factories, which means essentially we get the energy for free, we have no fuel costs, we have no fuel wastes, and our fuel source is 93 million miles away in distance. It's only 8 minutes away in terms of the time it takes that energy to leave the sun and get to us. So there's no pollution from the factories of sources of fuel. Once in a while, human beings have to go into the factories to do repairs or make changes that the robots can't do. And we try to make the human beings as clean as possible. We've developed this gadget which the local workers call the car wash. You get into your spacesuit and then go through this system which scrubs and washes and tries to get all the grease and the oil and the perspiration and dust off the outside of your suit so that when you go into the lunar factory, you're as clean as the factory is itself. Now, in the 19th century, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. said that Boston is the hub of the solar system. In the 21st century, Moonbase is the hub of the solar system. We build space transportation systems. We supply space expeditions. We service other people's spacecraft in our underground facilities. We are supplying the explorers of the planet Mars with all the oxygen that they use and lots of other material as well. And we have sent explorers out to the asteroids, which are mostly in orbit beyond Mars. The asteroids are small bodies. Some of them just a few feet across, others several miles across. The largest is about 400 miles in diameter. They represent the kinds of heavy metals that we can't get on the moon. If you're really looking for gold or platinum or nickel, the asteroids are the place to go. Some asteroids also have significant amounts of water in them and other volatiles like carbon and nitrogen. So they're valuable to us at moon base for life support materials. And the heavy metals, of course, allow us to do things and to use these resources that we cannot find on the moon itself. Our explorations have gone as far as the giant planet Jupiter. That's 11 times larger than the Earth. That's one of Jupiter's satellites, Io, which is roughly the size of our own moon. You can see how large Jupiter itself is. And we've become inordinately interested in comets. A comet is nothing more or less than a large chunk of ice with some impurities. And that brilliant tail you see is mostly water being boiled away as the comet comes close to the sun. When Halley's Comet came past the Earth in 1985 and 86, it boiled away something like 30 million tons of water in the couple of months it took to go around the sun. Now that's water we can use, and we are developing spacecraft to essentially scoop up that water and bring it back to moon base. We have also built spacecraft to leave the solar system entirely and go out toward the stars. But most interestingly, moon base and the Russians at Leningrad have cooperatively started to build an astronomical facility on the other side of the moon. Now, as you know, there is no dark side of the moon. Both sides of the moon get sunlight and darkness the same amount. But because the moon's rotation is locked so that one face is always pointed toward Earth, there is a side of the moon that never sees the Earth, and that we from Earth have never seen, not until we started firing rockets at the moon. That far side of the moon is an ideal place for astronomical research, especially radio telescope searches, because you're separated from all the radio noise of Earth by 2,000 miles of rock. It's a very quiet place for radio telescope work, and it's with radio telescopes that we search for intelligent signals from other stars. So Leningrad and Moonbase have cooperatively built an astronomical research center. We call it Star City. In Russian, I believe the word is Zvezdagrad. And the computers running the facility have detected what may be signals from intelligent life deep in space in the region of the constellation Sagittarius. But I don't want to give you the impression that if you work at Moonbase, it's all going to be work. We have some games to play too. There's relaxation, there's recreation and sports. For example, every year between Christmas and New Year's, we have a tractor race. Now, these surface vehicles have been working at various jobs all year long, and the people who run them try to soup them up for the race each year. It's a race that takes about 48 hours. It goes from Moonbase generally to the crater Opelt and back again, and it's a very tense and exciting competition. These tractors can get up to speeds of 20, maybe 30 miles an hour. And the excitement is sort of like watching a cricket match in England. It's a real competition, but everything happens very slowly. There are also some very interesting evolutions of earthly sports. Imagine basketball in 1/6 gravity. Imagine our Olympic-sized swimming pool with its 90-meter diving board. You can do a lot of somersaults on your way down to the water. And all in slow motion, beautifully slow tumbles. Highlight gets to be very interesting, believe me. We have recently started tourism on the moon. People from the Earth want to come to the moon. Transportation is now cheap enough so that you can get to the moon for about the same cost as a around-the-world flight on a commercial airline. And there are scenic wonders on the moon and also historic shrines, like the Apollo 11 landing site, which we have domed over and protected so it will never be disturbed. We have sprayed clear cement over the footprints so they won't be bothered. And human beings go there to see where we first set foot on the moon. You can go mountain climbing on the moon. That's Moonbase down on the bottom. And you're looking from the top of Mount Jaeger, which is the tallest mountain in the ring wall surrounding our crater. Mount Jaeger is 12,310 feet high. Now, you might think climbing a mountain where everything weighs only 1/6 that of Earth would be easy, but remember, you're also carrying a spacesuit that would weigh a couple of 100 pounds on Earth. So there are problems. And also, these mountains have been sort of sandpapered by micrometeorites for billions of years. So they're very smooth, in some places even glassy. Tourists can climb Mount Jaeger with the aid of guides from Moonbase. Professional mountain climbers like to go to the lunar South Pole. There's a range there called the Leibniz Mountains with half a dozen peaks taller than Everest. Of course, the tallest mountain in the solar system is on the planet Mars. It is fittingly called Mount Olympus. It is 3 times taller than Everest. 5 times taller than Everest. The base of the mountain is about the size of the state of Iowa. It's a very large, old volcano, and people would love to climb that. So far, nobody has. One favorite sport of people, or recreation, I should say, both of employees and visitors to the moon, is Earth watching. If you think it's romantic to stand out in a field and look at the moon, you haven't seen anything until you stand out and look at the Earth. It is much larger than the full moon. It is much, much brighter. You can even read the fine print on your employment contract by Earthlight. Even when the portion of the Earth is dark, you can see the lights of cities twinkling. It's a magnificent sight, and it's always changing and shifting as the weather patterns change. Very romantic. And there's one other thing you can do on the moon that you really can't do on Earth. You know, one thing is fly like a bird in the base. The other is what we call the First Footprints Club. You can literally plant your footprints where no human being has ever gone before. And the First Footprints Club will register the lunar longitude and latitude of your personal footprints, spray them with clear cement so no one can disturb them for the next billion years or so, and give you a little card, which you can go back to Earth and show all your friends. My footprints are at such and such a longitude and latitude. There's plenty of room for first footprints. The surface area of the moon is about equal to that of North and South and Central America combined. So there is a real viable community on the moon in the 21st century. Now, we're not there yet. We're back here in 1988. But Moonbase is going to be built. It may not be built by Americans. It may be built by Russians or Europeans or Japanese or Chinese. The point is that your economic opportunities are where they are. And if you want to build a strong economy for this region, you must consider the impact that the future is going to have on you. If there's one lesson to be learned from considering a moon base, it is this: the world changes. We're not going to be in the same condition as we are today for very long. New technologies are changing the way we live, changing the economic situation, changing the way our children are going to live. The fallout from space is really new opportunities. You may not build a space center in northern Idaho, but what happens in space is going to determine the income, the economic strength, even the health of the people who live in this community. So think about space as you plan your future, because the real opportunities, the real chance to add wealth to our system is in space. If you think of the Earth as sort of a fixed amount of natural resources that we must somehow share with everyone else on Earth, then realize that the resources we have already seen in space, on the moon and elsewhere in the solar system, are thousands of times larger than the resources the Earth contains. We have the ability to increase the human race's supply of wealth by factors of thousands. And that's what you've got to strive for. That's what you must account for as you consider your own economic futures. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to answer any questions I can in the time we have left. Thank you. Are there any questions? How many of you would go to Moonbase to work for at least a year? Good. This book does contain an employment contract in very fine print in the back. There are blanks where you can fill in your name and even your own salary. I'm not sure that the Moonbase management would accept the salary figure, but you could try. Yes, sir. What should be our first priority in the space program? In the U.S. space program, the first priority has got to be to get the shuttle flying again, and I think that will happen by Labor Day. And then we must begin to develop permanent bases in orbit. You know, NASA wants to build a 6-man space station. This industrial company, Space Industries Incorporated, will be putting up a small factory in orbit. There won't be people living in it. The astronauts will visit it from time to time. I think it's very important to realize that we are now at a stage in space where private industry is coming in. Private companies will be launching payloads into space for profit. And once that happens, then the real strength of the American system comes into play. So far, space has been entirely a government operation, whether it's the United States or Western Europe or Russia or Japan or what. But when private industry comes in its greedy, sloppy, capitalistic way, you know, looking for money, then things really begin to take off. And I think we're just at that point right now. What skills will people need to work at Moonbase? I have a small list of job opportunities. I'll just read off a few. The basic skill, of course, is the ability to learn. You'd be surprised how few people really have that. Too many people seem to think that they acquire a skill at some point in their life, and that's their meal ticket forever. We have different jobs for different kinds of people. The Department of Management is looking for administrators, attorneys specializing in contracts. We try to keep them on Earth. We don't want lawyers on the moon. Educational administrators, interactive TV technicians. We have a lot of interactive television where you talk to the people you're watching and they talk back to you. Most education on Moonbase, and everybody remains in school constantly. The teachers, for the most part, remain on Earth. But through interactive television, you can have access to the finest teachers in the world and get personalized instruction. Let's see, our Department of Health and Safety is looking for environmental scientists, engineers and technicians, medical doctors, nurses. We need all sorts of engineers. In our tourist program office, which is the newest part of Moonbase, we need hotel management people, recreational services, food and beverage services, and tour guides, paramedical specialists. And of course, scientists and engineers in many, many fields, ranging from astrochemistry to artificial intelligence, planetary astronomy, chemistry, low-gravity physiology. Interesting things happen to the human body when you live for a long time in lower gravity. In zero gravity, right now, you know, the Russians have had several cosmonauts living in zero gravity on their space stations for many, many months at a time. They gain a couple of inches of height in zero gravity because on Earth, the Earth's gravitational force pulls us down toward the center and our spine bends into an S shape. In zero G, that force is absent and your spine straightens out. A 5'4" cosmonaut suddenly becomes a giant 5'6", and they love it. Unfortunately, when they return to Earth, they go back to their original height. But there are some very interesting physiological adaptations to low gravity.
Yeah, do you find that the moon base is a bit more viable than like the L5 system because of transportation costs?
The transportation costs really don't matter between Moonbase and L5. The L5 idea is to build an artificial world in what is now empty space, and to make it large enough, like the size of Manhattan Island, you know, 12 miles long or so, so that you can build a completely Earth-like environment inside, trees and streams and hills and whatnot, and then spin it so that there's a feeling of gravity. So you make your own perfectly Earth-like world. That is a concept that requires enormous investment of capital up front. Moonbase's great advantage is it's a money-making proposition almost from the start, because we started very early selling oxygen and other materials. What I see happening is that operations like Moonbase will generate the capital that will eventually be used to build permanent habitats for people in L5 or elsewhere in space. Those very large space habitats can also move if you want them to. Back in the 19th century and earlier, we had whaling expeditions where a young fellow would sign up out of New Bedford in Massachusetts and go off on a whaling ship for a couple of years and come back either rich or dead. Well, that's going to happen again. We're going to have large vehicles going out to the asteroid belt and come back with a hold full of precious metals, or not come back at all. So in the 21st century, you'll see people signing up for a couple of years before the mast. Oh, sure, that has already happened. With the space shuttle, it is no longer necessary to be a hotshot jet jockey. It's no longer necessary to be a pilot. Most of the astronauts now on NASA's payroll are not pilots. They are scientists or engineers. They're called mission specialists. They do not fly the shuttle. They ride in it as passengers. Sally Ride is not a Chuck Yeager. She can fly, but you know, she's not a test pilot by any means. And this will happen increasingly. John Young, the first pilot of the space shuttle, carried his bifocals up into orbit with him. You know, and he was 50 years old. There's hope for us yet. Right, I see computer systems in general getting more and more capable. Artificial intelligence is sort of a word that can start arguments among people who work in the field, because they each have a different definition of what artificial intelligence is. I don't see the kinds of robots that science fiction has produced that think and react the way human beings do as being very near in the future. What I do see is more and more capable computer systems. Already today we have expert systems that can do lots of things and are being used in business and scientific research laboratories. Chess-playing computer systems are now just below the grandmaster level, and eventually chess-playing computers will do much better than any human being possibly can, simply because they never forget and they never make a dumb move. But I don't see it as a competition. I see this as a cooperation. It may be odious, and I'm not quite sure which one is the owner and which one is the pet, but I see computers becoming friends of human beings in the same way that dogs are. Not merely pets, but cooperative allies, the way a dog helps a shepherd. It just may be eventually that we're the dog and the computers become the shepherds. That would be a very interesting development, especially around fire hydrants. No, I don't think we can really take enough material away from the moon to affect its orbit. I mean, human activities are still minuscule when you start talking planetary scales. Now, deeper thinkers like Freeman Dyson have suggested that really advanced civilizations will one day pulverize all the planets of their solar system and build a shell around the sun so that they can capture all the energy that the sun transmits. You know, right now we get only like 0.001% of the energy that the sun is beaming into space. The rest of it is just, you know, goes out into space. And a truly advanced civilization may want to use all of that energy and therefore use the material bodies of its planets to build a shell that totally encloses the sun. But it's going to be a long time before we even have the capability to consider that. And I think the environmental movement will be strong enough to prevent that from happening.
With the current technology, is steel that's being used, can it handle the temperature ranges that we have to consider on the moon? Or are they going to be using more composition, like graphite substances?
I think you'll find more and more composites being used. The ceramics are becoming very, very useful in handling high temperatures. If you take a look at the way the development of rocket engines and heat shield materials have gone in the field of astronautics, metals are giving way to composites and ceramics all along the field. Eventually, you may be able to develop the construction of materials that are coated with diamond, which has very good heat transfer properties, is very strong, very rigid. On the moon, in a low-gravity, high vacuum environment, it's possible to make diamond films and even gemstone diamonds out of methane gas. You can build up the crystals, and this will drive De Beers crazy. I think they'll try to buy out Moonbase eventually. But there are all sorts of fascinating possibilities here. But composites and diamond and other artificial gems are going to be the heat-handling materials of the future. Will there be a deal for frequent flyers? Most likely, if private enterprise runs the transportation system without too much government regulation. It says here in your Moonbase Employees Guide that Moonbase will pay your transportation to the moon when you begin work, and if you're there for a 1-year contract period or a 2-year contract period, they will pay your transportation back to Earth at the end of your contract. If you want to go back for a vacation, that's up to you. You have to pay for that yourself.
I was wondering if you visualize a lot of transportation from one Earth station to another, from the Earth station to the moon currently. Maybe you can go somewhere else for a vacation.
Oh, you certainly can, yes. In fact, I have a secret, well, not so secret desire to get into business in space myself. I want to build in orbit where you can achieve zero gravity. I want to build a honeymoon hotel. And the motto of my hotel will be, if you like waterbeds, you're going to love zero G. Is heaven or hell here on Earth? I think that people make their own heavens and hells. I think one of the keenest observations on that was by John Milton in Paradise Lost, when Lucifer finds himself in hell with his other rebellious angels, and they're pretty downcast, if you'll pardon the pun. And Lucifer tries to rally their spirits. He says, the mind is its own place, and of itself can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell. I think what you're talking about really is your own inner feelings, rather than a physical place where souls are sent. Eventually, I think the materials that you can't get on the moon will be imported from the asteroids. In fact, as I point out in the book, there are a number of asteroids that have orbits that bring them pretty close to the Earth and the moon. These are called the Apollo group of asteroids, and their orbits cross the Earth's orbit. And you might be able to intercept one or more of them and you mine them. They're very small. They're only a couple of miles across, so their gravitational fields are negligible. So this means you can get to them pretty easily and mine materials off them without the gravitational costs and the energy costs of taking materials from a large body like the Earth. Well, I picture Moonbase as being a corporation whose major stockholders are the governments of 15 industrialized nations. And I did that for the following reason. I won't say most, but many of the nations of the Earth have already signed a treaty, a United Nations treaty that has a very long name but is usually called the Moon Treaty, which says essentially no nation can claim sovereignty on the moon. The United States and the Soviet Union signed an earlier treaty in 1967 that had among its provisions the same sort of thing. When we landed on the moon and Armstrong and Aldrin planted that flag, they said they came in peace for all mankind. I don't know how you women feel about that, but the idea was this was not the United States claiming the territory. Legally, neither this nation nor any other signatory of those treaties can claim sovereignty over any territory on the moon. Therefore, I have set up a corporation because there are no rules in any treaty that says you cannot use the moon. You cannot use the materials of the raw or the natural resources. So you cannot say this is American soil or this is Russian soil. And because of that, and to get around the competitive aspects of national governments, I think you may see multinational government corporations being formed. There is a lot of cooperation in space endeavors right now. There are many cooperative projects, both in the East and the West. And I believe that as we develop more and more on the moon, multinational corporations will lead the way and governments will be in the background. The last row.
What is your thoughts on extraterrestrial life? And are we going to incorporate with them or are we going to compete with them at space?
Well, first we've got to find them, or they've got to find us. Despite 50-some years of stories about flying saucers, there is absolutely no evidence that there is any extraterrestrial life. Now, my belief is that there must be other forms of life and other intelligent species out there. The universe is very large, and it sort of is difficult for me to accept the idea that we're the only critters around. Of course, some people sometimes ask, is there intelligent life on Earth? But we know, at least in northern Idaho, there is. I suspect that sooner or later we will find some evidence of intelligent life, and then we face a very, very interesting philosophical and religious problem, because it's very unlikely that this intelligence is going to look like us. And the idea that God created man in his image is going to come under a severe test when we find other intelligent creatures who may be even more intelligent or further advanced than we are and don't look like us at all.
Could it be that God meant that a spiritual being inside of you, not the outward appearance?
Well, that could be. I don't really know. I think that's a subject that most people have to decide in their own minds and their own souls and hearts. But many people take those words literally. And I think there will be an enormous cultural shock when we come across other intelligent species that really look very, very different from anything we've ever seen. Sorry? All right, one more question. I saw a hand right there.
Would it be feasible to alter the orbit of any of those smaller asteroids across with one actually pull one out of orbit?
It is feasible, even with current technology. It would be a considerable task. Whether it would be desirable or not remains to be seen, because the amount of materials that we would be using are small, even compared to a mile-long asteroid. I mean, a mile-long object, let's say a nickel-steel asteroid, and there are thousands of them, contains more high-grade steel than the whole Earth manufactures in many, many decades. We're talking about millions of tons of material here. It's like, you know, when you go mining on Earth, do you saw off the mountain and bring it to your factory? Or do you take the stuff that you want and transport that? So I think for a number of reasons, we'll probably take some of the materials from an asteroid and use that, rather than try to alter the orbit of the asteroid and bring it to the place where we want it to be. Much more likely, we'll build factory ships, like the old whaling ships, go out to where the raw materials are and process them on the way back, and hope that we're making the right products by the time we get back to market. Thank you very much. You've been a very, very interesting audience. Thank you.